legs to back legs, two legs, like a jackrabbit, running, and it bounds an incredible amount of distance in about 5 bounds. And I'm watching this, and like you just said, that moment of terror, the fight or flight moment kicks in. This thing is running at me. And as I crouch down, I'm actually in a combination between a genuflect and I'm trying to turn to get up to run to get speed because I'm worried that this thing is coming after me. And as I'm looking over my left shoulder, I see it stand up. So I crouch down because I'm like, it's standing up.
How tall was it when you saw it stand up?
Well, this is the thing. I couldn't figure out the math till later when I went down and I went with my wife. We went and there was a cedar where it was kind of standing, a small one, the self-seated thing that's down. There's a wild brush down there. And when it was standing next to it, it was at least in my vision, because I'm almost 50 acres away from this. It looked to be about a foot taller. So when we got down there, that little cedar was probably 6 foot, maybe plus. So maybe it was 7.5 feet. Now looking back at it, and also in retrospect, thinking it looks svelte, standing sideways, looking at the bush to where these coyotes were all freaking out. But when it crouched down and I lost sight of it, and it came bounding out of that brush, it was wide. It looked thick. And you know, have you ever seen like shots of in the Jeannie Goodall or stuff with the mountain gorillas, and they know that they're in, and they come bounding out as a form of like kind of aggression. And I remember you were talking earlier about the tree shaking and stuff. It seemed like it almost had that look that it was like aggressively moving on 4 legs towards me. And I remember even seeing that like shaking of like chest muscle as it hit the ground on its 2 front legs, and then would go back and then back again. It's like I said, like a jackrabbit, almost moving, and his legs moving under itself. So it's like propelling itself like a dog running really fast. But that stand up, all of a sudden stop, and I'm looking, going, okay, it's standing there now, turns to its left, and then walks on 2 legs, half of that acreage, because it almost came up the center part of the acreage in the pasture, across that open pasture, into another part of because you know, like on field lines and 50-acre or 100-acre parcels, there's usually an old tree line. So it crossed into that tree line, into my neighbor's back 50, which goes into the Boyne, B-O-Y-N-E, conservation area. And our property sits between the 2 forks of the Boyne River, and it actually flows to the east from where my house is, but it gets wider as it moves like 3.5, 4 miles away from my house.
Well,
but it's all conservation area.
I want to touch into something right there, because you mentioned about it, running on 4 legs. You know, that may be probably, in the situation when I saw what we saw, it was like standing, and it stared at us, and we first thought it was a bear till we looked at it through a telephoto lens, and then we should have snapped a picture, but when I realized it was not a bear, and it screamed, it made like, I can tell you, like the old Art Bell show, he always played a thing and said, hey, this is a Bigfoot scream. It didn't sound like that. It was completely different, but it was so, that alone as what freaked me out the most was a scream. But how it got about 2 miles back to where our car was, and it knew where our car was, that's what I can't understand. But the thing is, its arms, what I saw, was down roughly to where our knees would be. I mean, it was the arms were probably a good foot longer than what my arms and your arms would be. And it does for speed run on all 4s. Then it's kind of interesting right there.
Well, and that's the other thing when you start doing other research on that. Like even with the thing that happened with me in 2007, I started a couple people that I knew I could talk to it about with. We started trading some stories, and I got a call from a friend of mine one day who sent me a thing that was a report from the BFRO about another incident that happened in Ontario. And it wasn't too far from where we are, 10, 15 miles. And what they said is what turned it on for me, because it was 4 people in a car that described what they thought was going to be, they thought they were going to come up on a deer.
Uh-huh.
Coming up this side road, and they slowed the car down, and the animal stopped. But as they got closer to see, well, look at the deer, they said they saw a jackrabbit-sized man, like hairy, running on all fours in the ditch, and it took off back towards wherever it was running from after they stopped and were close enough to see what was going on. So I think there's a big difference between recognizing that they thought they were going to come up to a deer, so expecting a deer, and then, I'm looking, what am I looking at here?
Yeah.
That's not a deer. And having 4 eyewitnesses that ended up actually reporting it just sort of hit me again, like, wait a minute, that's so similar in feeling to what I remember. And it was that jackrabbit-sized looking man thing that was like, it's like, again, that's kind of why I even use that, because that's why, what I saw had that same feeling to it. And, again, I don't know, MK Davis, he's actually a friend of mine on Facebook. There's a couple things that he's done too, where he's camera work where this thing looks like it's running on all fours and stops, and it seems to be squatting, Sasquatch, excuse the pun, and then almost like standing up and then running on all fours again.
Well, maybe that's how they get their speed.
It could be true. They're in trees, so they're incredible climbers, right? Like
You know what? Did you? In my case, also, when it got near where the car was and it was bowling a tree over, I noticed the most foulest smelling. It smelled like feces and urine, so strong, it was nauseating. And, weather in the Canadian Rockies in June is still, you're driving up the Rockies, you see a lot of snow off and on, and it's still kind of chilly.
But that smell, you remember that smell?
Oh, yeah. Foul. Yeah. I mean, it was so pungent and, it just nauseating.
Well, I didn't have that because I was upwind.
Yeah, well, you're lucky on that one, I tell you. That's
winds. Well, this is the reason why I think I triggered it, because less than 20 seconds of realization going on, and then fear, wanting to turn and run, and then looking again. Inside of 50 to 60 seconds, maybe a minute and a half. It's so hard to the time almost seems to stand still, and yet at the same time it's moving really quickly. It's almost in some way, looking back, it seems unreal, but that's the thing. It was so prolific. And the other thing, inside of the research behind it, aside from, other people that have done stuff talking about it, when I started asking questions, this area in particular, like you had mentioned in our pre-show conversation, had stuff happening in it since the 20s.
Uh-huh.
And reports that were either sounds that people heard, things that they saw crossing the road, and then you start going, well, maybe there's something about the area. We've got a lot of orchards in this area. There's a good food source here for a number of months every year. I don't know what the math is on it, but why we saw what we saw when we saw it was enough to at least make us question a lot of things. Well, and then go, well, there's got to be something else to this. But then people are like, well, show me a body, right?
No, I don't know. I put it this way. I'll be honest with you, Ed. I haven't wanted to go camping. I haven't wanted to go in the woods. I have had no desire to do anything after that. And it happened so fast. I will say this. I remember it was like a darkish, and I'm colorblind, but it was a darkish brown. It wasn't black. It was really, really hairy, but the face wasn't all covered with hair. It did have some, bald spots on the face, but the face wasn't like a human face, but it wasn't like a monkey face. So, and it definitely was not a bear. I'll tell you that, because, like I was telling you, we stopped at a little store about 15, 20 miles away from there, and the storekeeper told me that they were having Bigfoot sightings, and he wanted to know what it looked like, and we told him what it looked like, and he said that definitely sounds like a Bigfoot. And I put it this way, it was about 8 feet tall and probably weighed, I would say, probably in the neighborhood of about 500 some pounds. So I mean, just guessing at it.
What time of the year was it again, Gary?
It was the first part of June. That's when we went up there to go up there, and we went up there to photograph old silver mines and stuff, because that part of the area up there, the Canadian Rockies, was well known for silver mines. So that's what we did. And then we were told there was an old World War II Japanese internment camp, and that's where we were at. There was like one or two old kind of the buildings were still standing, kind of. But to the left of the buildings, there was this great big pit, and where the mine was. And that's where we saw it. It was right, probably 100 yards, maybe 200 yards from us, something like that. And I tell you, I wish I never saw it. I tell you that, because I still till today, I still every so often will go to bed at night and have a dream about it. It was scary. It's the scariest thing I've ever in my entire life had to ever experience.
Well, and after talking to some people too, you start to realize that there may be more people than we know that have had something that has occurred driving late one night somewhere. They've seen something, and they could chalk it up to being tired or whatever it is. They were distracted. They thought they saw this, but there's been too many things, even with the police, on dash cams, that have caught some stuff that they go, look, what is this? They don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, again, the people that maybe are the disbelievers, and I always carry a healthy sense of skepticism into a lot of things that I look at. But when you have reputable, people at universities, biologists, guys that are working for forensics, they're called into court cases to identify things in murder investigations, that are all saying there's something to this, because there's something out there making this print, whether it be a foot or handprint, or there's still, the jury's still out on the whole hair, DNA analysis factor, or whatever else is collected in the field. But I think that those kind of people talking, like John Bindernagel is one of those people. He's like, look, we want to be doing some kind of hard research about this. He's even written, I believe, a book that was based on something to do with how to kind of research it and to look into it, because a lot of his fellow colleagues and things like that thought, well, this is a crazy thing to get involved with, because it's myth, it's hearsay. But wait a minute, what about this evidence? Why are we not scrutinizing this? There must be something to this. So unless it's the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on history, it's a phenomenon that it seems to be occurring all over the world, from Asia Minor to the Himalayas to Canada to the United States to New Mexico. So there's got to be something to it.
It has happened for too many years. I mean, going back to the American natives and your natives in your country. I mean, the Indians, they talk about it. But I'll tell you something. Where I was at, there was nobody around. Even the traffic going on that road, going to that part of the Canadian Rockies, there was hardly any traffic. I mean, maybe 10, 15 minutes and you see a car go by. I doubt in my case there was some guy who was about 8 feet tall, walking around in a ape suit trying to scare people, because how many people are going to hike in about 2 miles to this place? And, it just... and I don't know many people can actually take about a 20, 25-foot fir tree and kind of bend it over like a bow, and, that in no way. But that...
Well, feats of strength, Jerry. Gary, feats of strength.
Yeah.